Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. John Keir joining you as always, and also joining is Austin Davidson, my co-host.
Heyo.
How you doing today, Austin? It is March 21st, and we're a little over a month, away from the NFL draft, and the free agency dust has settled, and some teams looking better, some teams looking worse. The national media seems to think the Steelers are a lot worse off, and with the moves the Browns have made, they're now the favorites to win the AFC North. What do you think about that?
I think it's a little bit preemptive, but I do think they're going to be a stronger team. I know for a fact I think Cleveland is better than Cincinnati and the Ravens, but I'm not ready to rule the Steelers out of the division yet. I'm just not. The Browns have a lot to prove. A lot of people are joining the ship right now, but they still have a lot more to prove. Anything could happen. Baker could regress in his sophomore season, and it could screw over their entire season. We'll see.
Remember, expectations change everything, and I think we're going to see that. I think we'll definitely see a good team, but remember that we all thought that the 2011 Philadelphia Eagles were going to be the best team in football as well, and that dream team, as Vince Young coined it, ended up being, I believe, 8-8. So remember, championships are not won in March; they're won, they're won when you play the games in September through January and February. So they're definitely a better team, but all in all, I think it's a little too much hype right now. But some teams are definitely indisputably better than they were a few weeks ago, and some teams are worse. The Steelers, you could argue, are worse without Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, and other teams are better, such as maybe the Jets for acquiring a player like Bell. Now that we've had some time to digest everything that's happened in free agency, there are still some minor moves being made, but all the big moves are over with. What are some big moves that really stuck out to you?
I really like the Le'Veon Bell move. That was probably the best one. The Jets got for really cheap, and it's really helpful for Sam Darnold. That's one of my favorite ones. Then my second favorite one is still Matt Paradis to the Panthers. I think the Panthers got to steal, not having to pay Matt Paradis top center money. He got paid $2 million less than Marquise Pouncey and Mitch Morse. I think that's the steal of this free agency. I was surprised. I'm shocked. It's still one of my favorites. How about you?
Definitely the Raiders picking up Vontaze Burfict.
That's a great one. Yeah, that's my favorite one too.
We'll elaborate more on that signing in a little bit, or actually closer to the end of this episode. But let's move into some moves the Steelers have made, because they've made some relatively big moves, at least considering what we're used to typically seeing from the Steelers, although they never made, I guess, a huge splash, if you will. They did kind of the typical Steeler thing when it comes to addressing free agents, but maybe spent a little more than we're used to. Well, let's get into it a little bit. They signed, obviously we had already talked about Steven Nelson on the last podcast, and now they've also signed linebacker Mark Barron from the Rams and former Colts and Jaguars wide receiver Dante Moncrief to join Ben Roethlisberger in the offense. So what do you think about bringing in those two guys and just the whole outside free agency class as a whole? Because all three of these guys can play. They really aren't the long-term answer, but they do kind of fill a hole. Do you kind of like the way this offseason has gone so far?
So with the Steven Nelson signing, I had to be convinced to like it. These other two signings that happened, I actually really like both of them. Mark Barron, I was warned by Rams fans, has been detrimental to them. So when I saw it, I was weary at first. I was waiting for the amount of money that went into it. And when I saw it was only $6 million a year for likely the Steelers' dime linebacker to fill that role that Morgan Burnett will probably leave open when he gets cut, I liked it. $6 million for a linebacker after this year is pretty cheap. Like, we saw some big deals, and Bud Dupree, the Steelers obviously gave him $9 million. And I like Mark Barron as a player more than Bud Dupree. So I feel like I really like the Mark Barron signing. Obviously different positions, but I'm just saying different types of linebacker, I'm sorry, is what I mean. But I like that deal. And then with the Dante Moncrief deal, I loved it without even knowing how much money it was. And then when I saw it was $4.5 million a year, I just loved it. This deal is one of my. I might be biased because I'm a Steelers fan. We're obviously both Steelers fans, but I thought this was one of the best moves of the offseason for any team. I was shocked. I thought he was going to at least get $6 million a year because he's a good wide receiver. He just had a bad year with a bad quarterback. We saw him put up numbers with Andrew Luck, and even guys that put up similar numbers to him have gotten paid. Like, see Paul Richardson for 1 year with the Seahawks, getting paid like $11 million a year to go with the Redskins. Like, I was just shocked to see that the deal was so cheap for Dante Moncrief. I think he took a hometown discount. I think I'm not sure that Moncrief is from Pittsburgh. I actually don't know where he's from, but I know his dad is a big Steelers fan. I've been reading a lot about that his dad played a big role in him going to Pittsburgh. So I think that's probably why he took such a cheap contract. I think he probably got offered bigger deals elsewhere, in my mind at least. What do you think of the signing?
Well, we already know that Steven Nelson was a Steelers fan back when he was a younger man. Moncrief is from Raleigh, Mississippi, but as you already said, his father was a big Steelers fan, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. But anyways, yeah, there are definitely some interesting moves. What I like that we typically see from these signings from Kevin Colbert, especially this year, is that there were clear needs at every position. You want to go starting outside cornerback, you've got the X receiver, and someone up the middle to replace either LJ Ford or really Ryan Shazier, but obviously no one in free agency would be able to do that successfully. But Colbert plugged in holes with guys that can play, and I think that he did a good job, and by doing this, he didn't back himself into a corner. We talked last year about how the Steelers absolutely needed to take an inside linebacker, and while I think that's still absolutely the position of greatest need, wouldn't you agree with me that at the very least, it's not the worst thing in the world if maybe Devin Bush gets picked, really early, say for some reason he gets picked like 12th, and you're not going to move up 8 spots to get him. You can settle for maybe getting a cornerback at that point or an edge rusher instead.
Yeah, I think Mark Barron allows that. Without Mark Barron, the Steelers needed to take an inside linebacker first. It was like, there's no question. But Mark Barron allows that versatility in the draft.
It definitely gives some flexibility, and unlike Steven Nelson, Mark Barron and Dante Moncrief add something different in the sense that we aren't exactly sure kind of what role they'll play in the defense. I think Barron especially. With Moncrief, I'm not exactly sure. Now, granted, we need to see what happens in the draft, but right now, the way I see it, I think Moncrief is going to play a little bit in the offense, but to be honest with you, I think depending on how high the Steelers take a receiver, he might just simply be the replacement for Justin Hunter. And while I know that sounds bad, he's a huge upgrade over Justin Hunter. I'm completely okay with that.
I agree. I mean, it's not hard to upgrade over Justin Hunter in my eyes, though. There's a lot of players that are an upgrade over Justin Hunter, but like I said, I love Dante Moncrief.
Indeed. And Moncrief doesn't add much in special teams, but he's a speedy guy. He can get down the field. He has size. Ben Roethlisberger likes his tall receivers, and I think it's a smart move. I don't know exactly how he'll fit in, like I was just saying, but how do you think he's going to be used right now?
I think he's going to be that speed guy that the Steelers need, the guy that runs straight, and like you said, like a Justin Hunter. I don't think he's going to be one of the 3 wide receivers on the field, like the starters, but I do think that he's going to play a key role. I think he's going to play more than Ryan Switzer. I'll put it that way.
I definitely could see a situation where he starts early on in the year and then maybe a draft pick comes in later on in the year. I think that's more likely, but again, we need to see who the Steelers would draft right now. But for right now, I think Moncrief would be a starter, assuming like the roles are all set. Well, then again, I guess I can't really say that because I guess it depends who's playing in the slot. Because I was saying that assuming Juju would be starting in the slot and not Switzer or Eli Rogers, but if Juju goes to the outside, then that means Switzer or Rogers will be inside. So I guess it really depends. But in any case, I think he's an interesting ad for sure. And then another player in Mark Barron. I'm not sure what the Steelers are going to do with him because there's two positions that I think he could be helpful at, and I'm not sure what would be better. There's obviously inside linebacker, which is where he plays, but he also talked about releasing of Morgan Burnett and the need to replace him as the dime backer. Now, those are two different positions, at least that they have been for the Steelers lately. Do you think the Steelers would be better served to have him be the dime backer mostly, or do you think they're going to try to have him be just an inside linebacker?
I think that he's going to be specialized as a dime backer with the Steelers. I think that's where he's going to be plugged in.
Time will tell. I'm really not sure what would be better. I know that from what I understand, his man coverage is not very good. And obviously, if you put him in at the inside linebacker position, you're running the risk of having teams run at him. And when he's taking on bigger offensive linemen, he was a safety in college and at the beginning of his NFL career. He's a bit undersized, so he can get kind of slowed down and knocked around by offensive linemen. So that is a bit of a concern, but we'll have plenty of time to analyze the signing of Mark Barron going forward and how he'll be used as well. Let's move on to talk a little bit about some of the players that were re-signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's start first with slot receiver Eli Rogers. So it was announced that his contract would toll, so he'd be coming back to the Pittsburgh Steelers. But then it was announced that he signed a 2-year, $3.75 million extension with the signing bonus of $500,000. A key slot receiver, although he didn't play much last year recovering from that ACL tear in 2017. Rodgers provided a little bit of spark to the offense late in the year, and he's another good slot option. A little different than Ryan Switzer, but similar in the sense that they're key out of the slot and they can both play on special teams. I'm sure this was a low cost signing, and I'm sure you're a big fan of it.
Yeah, I was a big fan. I thought Eli Rogers should have came back, and I do think it's a low risk, high reward type thing. We saw Eli Rogers in his first, when he 2 years ago, how he performed. If he could just recreate that, I feel like this signing is great. I mean, and if if he can't recreate it, if the injuries have slowed him down and made him not as good, it's not too hard to move on from him.
So right now the Steelers is DHB a free agent? Do you know?
Yeah, Darius Hayward-Bay is a free agent.
Okay, so there's only 5 receivers on the roster, and if you draft one, there's 6. I was going to ask you if you think there's a scenario where the Steelers would cut either Ryan Switzer or Eli Rogers because they are basically two of the same player.
I think there's a possibility that Switzer gets cut. I think that Eli Rogers would be the first to stay because Switzer's still on his rookie contract. So I feel like it'd be easier to cut him, and maybe that's backwards thinking. I'm still gonna go with Switzer. I think Switzer, but what's hard about it? Switzer provides special teams abilities, and he's the only wide receiver on the roster right now that does that. So maybe it would be Rogers first, even though Rogers actually is not on a rookie contract. It's tough. It's a tough decision. I think it's a possibility that one of them gets cut coming out of training camp, especially if they draft a guy early.
Well, here's the thing. If you cut Switzer, Eli Rogers becomes the punt returner again.
Yeah, but he wasn't really good at it, and Switzer was. But Switzer wasn't good at kick returns. That's the problem. Switzer was pretty bad at kick returns, actually. Only good at punt returns.
I thought Rogers was fine as the punt returner. The problem is, you remember last year he fumbled in Chicago, and then he wasn't the punt returner again until like Christmas Day. So we just didn't see much. I don't know. I'm not trying to make it difficult. I don't know how the Steelers are going to go if they're really going to try to just keep 2 pure slot receivers when Juju also plays in the slot. But the other thing to consider is that the guy that they draft, I'd have to assume that they're drafting, if they're going to draft a receiver, is going to be an outside guy to replace Antonio Brown, not a slot guy, because as we just said, they basically have 3 guys that can play in the slot right now.
Yeah, it'd be tough if they had another slot receiver. Talked about this on the podcast. I forget which one, but we said that the Steelers have a lot of slot guys and not a lot of those outside guys. We need another James Washington. That's proven.
All right, we'll get into that again more at another time. Let's move on to Jordan Berry, the Steelers punter, who had been a free agent even through the start of just a few hours before the start of free agency, he was re-signed to a 2-year deal worth $3.7 million. His base salary is only going to be $1.15 million in 2019, so he's going to be relatively easy to cut after this season if he continues to struggle. What do you think about bringing back Jordan Berry? We know that he wasn't the best, and we definitely wanted him cut last year, but I mean, he's not the worst. I don't think he's. I think there's room for improvement, but I don't hate him like I did last year.
Yeah, I'd say, man. Compared to last year, I don't have strong feelings towards it. Like, they could have moved on and I wouldn't have cared, and just re-signing him for familiarity, I'm like, okay, you know what, that's fine. Because he did finish the year stronger than he began it. I mean, still not great. Like I said, still finishes like the 28th ranked punter in almost all the punting categories, but it's fine. That's basically all. I don't have strong feelings on it. It's okay. What do you think?
I concur. Another guy who keeps coming back, despite everyone thinking that he would be gone year after year, is Daniel McCullers. He's back this time on a 2-year deal. I was not very happy when I saw the fact that it was a 2-year deal, but I guess at the end of the day, it's still pretty cheap. $2.75 million over the course of the contract, $1 million with a $250,000 signing bonus this year, and $1.5 million in 2020. McCullers, look, he had his best season under new defensive line coach Carl Dunbar this season, but I don't know. I still don't see enough in him for me to want to bring him back if I'm Kevin Colbert, but I guess they feel like they've seen enough, or maybe they think they can get more out of him.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess they probably were ready to cut him going into this year, and then Carl Dunbar worked with them, and they're like, well, maybe we'll give him a few more years to work with us, and maybe he'll actually be good. I don't know. I don't really understand the signing either. I think they could have just went with a late-round guy and added that way, but it is what it is. Not a terrible deal.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't hate the guy, but I mean, even with his best season that he's ever had, he was still quite clearly the 5th best defensive lineman. And I think now that you bring him back, you almost make it pretty difficult for me to think that you're going to take a mid-round selection on a defensive lineman like I thought the Steelers were going to. So I just feel like the depth at this position could be upgraded, and the Steelers just aren't going to do it now.
Yeah, that's exactly true. I agree with that. It might be a late round guy. Just bring him into camp like Josh Frazier.
Oh, Josh Frazier. He's the only draft pick besides Colin Holba that didn't stick on the roster the last 2 years. He's in the AAF. I'm pretty sure he's on the Birmingham Iron, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he got hurt, I believe. Fairly confident he got hurt, and that's why I think he still has a contract with the Detroit Lions going into training camp.
Let's segue to the Detroit Lions. The Steelers lost a couple of free agents this year. One of them, the big one that Steelers fans are most upset about, is losing reliable tight end Jesse James. It was tracked by Alex Kozora of Steelers Depot. The 273 training camp, OTAs and regular practices that he had attended and that the Steelers have had since his rookie season in 2015. Jesse James missed just one, and he's missed no games throughout his NFL career. Never a flashy guy, even at 6'7", but Jesse James had a solid career in Pittsburgh, and the Steelers now have a vacancy at the number 2 tight end position after he signs with the Detroit Lions for 4 years and $25 million with $11 million guaranteed. This one stings, and the thing that's unfortunate is that James will always be remembered for a touchdown that he officially never scored.
Yeah, it really was a shame. The best ability is availability, and that is the definition of Jesse James. It's going to suck going forward. Steelers are going to have to draft a tight end since it doesn't look like they're going to be signing one in free agency. There isn't really a good one anyway, and the tight end market, as we saw this year, was very broken. With blocking tight ends getting $6 million a year, but I'm glad that Jesse James got played. And I actually disagree. I think he has been flashy at times. I think he had that 5 reception, 130-yard game He had that 2-touchdown game to start. Was it this past season or was it 2 seasons ago? I think it was this past season against the Cleveland Browns, where he started with 2 touchdowns on the season. I think that I like his potential. I mean, you kind of always knew what he was. Maybe potential is the wrong word. You always knew what he was, and he was always there. And I really like Jesse James. It's really sad to see him go.
Especially when you consider that he's a homegrown guy, a Western Pennsylvania native, and a former Penn State football player. So it certainly sucks to lose him, but at the same time, it's nice to see a good guy like that get paid too, and he's certainly deserving of it. Another player that left through free agency was reserve inside linebacker L.J. Fort, another player that made the signing of Mark Barron at inside linebacker kind of paramount. Because you think about it, Fort, although he was never that great of a player, he was a key player in terms of what he provided for you in terms of coverage. He was the only other linebacker that could provide consistent coverage in the middle once Ryan Shazier went down. And I know he had his struggles, but it felt like the Steelers never gave him much of a fair chance. And, as a result, now he's on his way out. How are you going to, kind of rank the importance of losing someone like L.J. Fort?
See, this one hurt for me. This one hurt for me a lot, actually, seeing the deal and how much it was worth. Because I'm not going to say I'm not a fan of the Mark Barron deal. I did like it. But I think the Steelers probably should have saved the money and gotten L.J. Fort. And there's one big reason, and that's his special teams ability. L.J. Fort is a great special teamer. He's blocked punts and just blocked punts a few times this year. I think he did it twice last season. He's a great special teams player, and that I thought when he played pretty strong. I felt like I feel like he could be a starter. He has his downfalls, but most players do, and he's not a top player. But I think that he could be a bottom tier starter, and for the amount of money that it cost the Eagles, I was kind of upset. But so this one hurt me too. This and the Jesse James deal both hurt me. I thought the Steelers should have probably just offered him 3 years, $6 million contract and bring him back, but it is what it is.
Do you think it's possible that Fort just turned down the Steelers' offer because he didn't want to play there anymore?
Oh, it's possible. It is definitely possible. And because, honestly, Jesse James kind of said he was happy to be out for that same reason.
I was just wondering if it was more like he was tired of being passed over, because you think about it, I just think Fort looked at the situation in Pittsburgh and realized that he wasn't going to be playing significant snaps this year, looking at the fact that the Steelers were at least thinking about other guys in free agency and were most likely going to try to draft an inside linebacker. Because we remember they tried to trade up for Rashaan Evans last year, and we know that they're definitely keen on Devin Bush this year. So, I don't know. I think he probably knew the writing was on the wall. That's just kind of what I think.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially with the Eagles losing Jordan Hicks. He has a better chance at getting a start there. And also, he doesn't really have to move far, obviously, just the other side of Pennsylvania. So, I could see it.
All right, let's move on to what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about the interior offensive line, a position that was kind of a bit of a question mark just a few weeks ago, because you and I both thought, Austin, that Ramon Foster was going to be leaving via free agency, but surprisingly enough, he re-signed, and Marquise Pouncey also signed an extension. So here we are. We got the same 4 interior offensive linemen back in 2019. Obviously the starters, Foster, Pouncey, and David DeCastro, backed up by B.J. Finney, who's on a second-round tender. There is still theoretically a team that could place the second-round tender on him or sign him to an offer sheet, but I think that's unlikely at this point. So I guess, what do you think about what the Steelers have here? Because they've had this same group here for 6 to 7 years now.
Yeah, the whole line is not really changing. It's been the same, and it's still very, very good. Marquise Pouncey, a second-team All-Pro. David DeCastro was a snub for an All-Pro last year. He didn't allow a single sack, and B.J. Finney's been a reliable backup, and Ramon Foster's been a reliable starter since he's gotten here. It's just they got all they need right here, and more. The Steelers still have probably the top offensive line in the league, even after free agency and such, because they're still the same. They still have that same chemistry, and all the starting guys came back for this year with Ramon Foster returning. So, again, the Steelers have all they have and more. So, what do you have to say about this group?
Well, I think the Steelers definitely have consistency personified with this group here, and stability. I just mentioned the starting trio has been in place for almost 7 years now, if you exclude the 2015 season when Marquise Pouncey missed it all due to injury. But all three of them are impressive in their own rights, and we know that DeCastro and Pouncey are former first-round picks, high pedigree guys, former All-Pros who are athletic and one of the best at their positions year in and year out. And then Foster on the other end, former undrafted free agent, underappreciated and underpaid for most of, if not all of his career. And despite what Foster lacks in pedigree, we already know he makes up for his consistency. And despite the first few weeks of the season when he was recovering from that injury he suffered in training camp, he was good again in 2018. And I expect at least one more, maybe two more good years out of him. Sorry. But furthermore, Pouncey and Foster are two of the good leaders in the locker room. And Finney, as we know, is the swing backup at all positions. And despite being a center primarily at Kansas State in college, Finney has translated better as a guard in the NFL, using his speed to aid him when he's pulling. And he can still play center, but he's definitely better as a guard. So now let's talk a little bit about what B.J. Finney brings to the table and the fact that he's on a 1-year deal and Ramon Foster's on a 2-year deal. And we've kind of been talking for a couple of years now about Finney being groomed as the potential successor to Ramon Foster. I guess, how do you see this all playing out? Because we know that Finney could theoretically leave in free agency, because I wouldn't see the Steelers, doing a long-term deal for him at this point. So how do you see this going? Let's just say Ramon Foster plays in 12 or 13 games and Finney has to play in 3 or 4 games start in 3 or 4 games. Kind of how do you see things working out at that point?
I think B.J. Finney is going to be able to be retained. I think that he wants to be in Pittsburgh. I remember how his dad, there was a story about him how his dad grew up a Steelers fan and he grew up a Steelers fan. And I think he wants to be there. So I think at first I was weary and that he wouldn't return, because I think B.J. Finney could be a starter. I thought he was going to be a starter this year, and I was ready for it. I wasn't worried like, oh no, the Steelers are losing Ramon Foster. B.J. Finney was going to start. I was like, well, Finney's getting his time to shine because he's shown that he can play guard pretty well. Like with most Steelers backup linemen, it feels in the past years, he seems ready for starting gigs. But so I could see him leaving, but I don't think he does. I feel like he deserves a starting job earlier than he deserves a starting job now, realistically. But I think he's going to wait for it. I think he is going to stay with the Steelers to get that starting job. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think he's going to look at it and realize that his best chance at becoming a starter is whenever Ramon Foster decides to hang it up or when the Steelers decide to not extend him anymore, which I think this is his last contract. And I don't see him getting much more than maybe 2 or 3 years max, but probably for pretty cheap from any other team. I think he knows, kind of like what we saw from Alejandro Villanueva when he got his contract, is that all you really need is a chance. And I think right now, even though it's tough because he does have to wait, I think his best chance is just staying in Pittsburgh. So what it would take is what we saw with Chris Hubbard after Marcus Gilbert got injured back in 2017 and had the PED suspension, is that Chris Hubbard turned into a pretty solid starting tackle, and he started most of the games in a contract year, and he parlayed that into a nice contract for himself with the Cleveland Browns. I think it's going to take something similar to that, where maybe Finney starts, 8 to 12 games. I think that's what it will take.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know. I feel like Finney has gotten enough starting time through the seasons. It's not all at once, like with Chris Hubbard. But I still believe that teams would view him highly. Obviously, the Steelers thought so because they put a second-round tender on him this year. But it might take that this year just for him to leave, for a team to offer him a really big contract.
Throughout his 3-year NFL career, B.J. Finney has started 9 games and played in 43. He started 2 games last year, 4 games in 2017, and 3 games in 2016. So 9 starts over 43 games. I don't know. I still don't think that's enough. I feel like if it was maybe 15 games in that stretch, I think that might be more possible. But I still think teams just, I don't know. Then again, we have seen teams spending, quite fruitfully in free agency too. So I guess then again, I can't say for certainty that I don't think he'd be signed either.
Yeah, I feel you.
And that is the beautiful beast of free agency. But, all right, let's, real quickly, we just talked about the 4 guys there. Is there any need to add a guy in free agency at this point? I think if anybody's added, which I still think is unlikely, but if anyone is, I think it's in the draft and it's late.
Nah, I don't think really the Steelers are going to add at any point this year to the interior offensive linemen. There's just no need, not in free agency, not in the draft. It's a very, very low need. It's like just barely more than quarterback. So it really just basically non-existent. What do you think?
Completely agree with you. But obviously we're going to do our due diligence, and just in case, because you never know. Obviously we've been wrong before and we could be wrong again. So let's talk about some of the interior offensive linemen we looked at. And instead of just looking at pure centers or pure guards, we decided to make sure we looked at guys who project to be either a guard or center, or guys that played both guard or center in college. So why don't you talk to me about your first guy? We both have 3 prospects that we looked at. So tell me a little bit about Sean Rawlings from Mississippi.
Well, he's projecting to be a center as of right now, but he can play guard. He's 6'4", 294 pounds. Coming out of Madison Ridgeland Academy, Rawlings earned himself all Mississippi honors as a senior. He chose to stay in his home state and play for the Rebels. As a freshman and sophomore, Rawlings actually played mostly as a tackle as well. I forgot about that. I'm sorry. Making 7 of the 10 total starts his freshman year. Then he started 7 games as well as tackle in his sophomore season, but got 1 game where he started at center. And from there, he was always a center. In 2017 and 2018, he was a veteran presence in the middle of the Rebels line, and now he enters the NFL draft. I got confused. I confused him with a later prospect. He was tackle and center. But so what's good about him? What he's best at is how he reacts right after the snap. He has a good initial hand placement into contact, as well as solid initial quickness right after the snap. Then he also has a good lateral movement when he is slide protecting. Then he is an intelligent player that sets all protections. Finally, he has the potential to be to better his run blocking if he could just put on some more strength. So what's not so good about Rawlings is his strength. This stems from him being thin bones with skinny limbs and no bubble. He just doesn't have the core strength or functional power you'd want out of an NFL lineman. You can see it when he's run blocking. He just doesn't get that pop in the initial punch that you want out of an NFL lineman. You can also see his lack of strength when he gets bull rushed, where he lacks that anchor. Then, while he played tackle and center in college, his size and strength are going to only allow him to play center in the NFL level, so he loses that versatility he had in college. Now, just some quick-fire things. He gets cross-faced on pin-down blocks. He cannot recover and redirect defenders that attack his edge, and he fails to finish. So Rawlings could make himself more interesting if he could put on some more muscle and weight. I'm not sure he'll be able to fit enough on his frame to be versatile in the NFL, but at the end of the day, putting on strength will help him just in general. For now, though, his size is limiting him, and he has struggled at the college level because of it. So I think Rawlings is going to go undrafted, but still end up with a team for training camp. It's hard for me to even picture him being drafted as mystery relevant. I don't even think he's going to be a priority undrafted free agent. I think he's going to be added a little bit later in camp. So we'll see how that works out for Rawlings. But let's hear about your first prospect.
All right, and I looked at Ryan Bates from Penn State, a local Pennsylvania kid, and he played as a tackle at Penn State. So I just want to make sure people know that he was listed as a tackle at Penn State, but he's been listed as a guard on NFL.com's draft combine profile page. I apologize. So he's a redshirt junior declared for the draft out of Penn State at 6'4" and 306 pounds. So he definitely doesn't project as a tackle. He certainly seems to be more of a guard or center type of player from that kind of frame. Just a little bit about Ryan Bates. He was an All-State and All-Philadelphia Catholic League selection in high school. He started 14 games his redshirt freshman season at Penn State, started 10 games at left guard and 4 at left tackle, and he earned USA Today Freshman All-American honors in 2016, was third-team All-Big Ten in 2017 and 2018 as well, and started all 13 games last season, 9 at left tackle and 4 at right tackle. So what's good about Ryan Bates? What are the things he does well? Well, he shows a good, solid initial quickness off the line of scrimmage. You always like to see that from your offensive lineman, firing off the ball quickly and getting an advantage over the defensive line. He's good at gaining leverage in zone blocking plays, and he frequently, successfully moved his feet well enough to seal off defenders at the original first line of defense and the second level. A decent positional blocker, Bates has shown the ability to wall off defenders again because of his feet, and this can be done either through zone blocking or regular plays that are just run on his side. And this includes the ability to be able to seal off holes or backside protection as well on running plays. And he's not spectacular, but he's a solid lineman on the move. He'll get to where you need him to be more often than not. And he shows good technique in pass pro. It starts really with Bates lining up his back correctly. He's hard to move once he gets set in pass pro. His specialty as a pass blocker includes a well-timed and quick jab to defenders that he developed as a tackle in college. It's meant to slow you down, and you'll see this on stunning plays by the defense when they aren't engaged with you right away. It takes a few seconds for them to get to you, and he'll attack them that way. Bates is also interesting because he'll have a little gamesmanship with you, with the defensive lineman he's up against. Oftentimes he'll fake out one of those punches that he tries to hit the defenders with to try to get them to extend their arms. And once that happens, that's usually a mistake, because then Bates will be able to kind of see what you're trying to do, and he'll be able to counter based off of what you're doing. So it's kind of interesting to see that you've got a lineman that's in college that's already kind of developed a veteran-like move at that level. Ryan Bates has adequate body control and quickness for someone with his frame, and although he's built as an interior offensive lineman, his experience at tackle could let him become a backup swing tackle, possibly. Matt Filer, anyone? Again, if he develops properly. So, having experience at multiple offensive line positions is always nice, as we know, as Steelers fans. On the flip side, though, what's not so good, things that you might want to be concerned about with Ryan Bates, is that going along with his last positive, it isn't a negative in the sense that it's not a negative in that he can't play it. It's just that it's negative in that you aren't going to get Ryan Bates to be a full-time starting offensive tackle. He's not big enough to do it, just simply isn't, and he doesn't have the body type for it. And furthermore, he's lacking in lower body strength and mass, which means you shouldn't expect him to push the pile or push bigger defensive linemen right now. And despite showing the ability to wall off defenders, like I said, and the good technique in pass protection, his technique in run blocking outside of walling off defenders just isn't there. He doesn't have good leverage because his pad level is consistently high for someone his size, so he's usually hurting himself in the process on these running plays, and he tends to lose momentum and power when he starts to engage a defender after moving, so he'll get a good initial push when he's pulling and runs into a defender, but then he'll just kind of stop and he won't keep going. So that you don't really see devastating blocks from him. He just kind of absorbs more energy than you think he should for a big man moving like that. And furthermore, if you can get your hands on Ryan Bates as a pass rusher, you stand a good chance of getting by him. He doesn't reset his hands well, so if you get him off his base, he's in trouble. And these slow hands rear their ugly head in run blocking too. He can't react quick enough, and you think someone that is a strong hand fighter, specifically Aaron Donald, who's the best hand fighter I've ever seen on the defensive line, that would just be a nightmare. He'd have no chance. His slow hands would just absolutely get destroyed there. There'd be no chance he'd be able to provide any sort of protection whatsoever. So that really hurts his pass protection as well when you've got a good hand-fighting interior rusher. And while Ryan Bates is concerned about protecting the inside gap when he's protecting the quarterback, and that is always the first goal, I must point out, you must protect the inside first. He commits too hard to it at times and is going to sacrifice the edge more often than he should. This problem could be aided a bit by a move to guard full time. Therefore, the tackle might not be as far out, and therefore the guy that's rushing Bates who might not have as much room to get to his outside, but still, it is something to be concerned about. So, bottom line with Ryan Bates, he's a curious prospect. Doesn't really fit anywhere on the line as of today for most teams. He doesn't have the size or frame to stay at his college position of offensive tackle, but he also lacks the strength to be a good run blocker right now. But his best shot at playing time and sticking on a roster today would be getting drafted by a team that runs a solid zone blocking scheme that could use a backup center. And Bates could be used there. He has a chance to develop into a solid player, in my opinion, but he needs to bulk up, and he needs to improve his technique as a run blocker. He shouldn't be a day one starter, but I think he has a chance to be at least a solid backup, perhaps a starter someday, an average one anyways. So I guess bottom line, I see him as a day 3 pick, but again, time will tell. So that was Ryan Bates from Penn State. Let's hear about your second prospect. Who is your second prospect?
My second prospect is Iosua Opeta from Weber State. Wow, I can't speak. He is 6'4" and 301 pounds. Coming out of high school, Opeta was an honorable mention All-Utah defensive lineman. He decided to go to Weber State and ended up playing as a defensive lineman there, playing it in 4 of 11 games, getting 16 tackles and a half sack as a freshman. The next year, he switched over to offensive line, playing left tackle and earning all Big Sky honors. In 2017, Opeta became a football championship subdivision All-American for starting all 14 games on the left side. He also earned third-team Associated Press honors that season as well. In his final season, he was a first-team All-Conference selection for playing all 13 games at left tackle. He was also upgraded to second-team Associated Press honors in his senior season as well. And now he heads into the draft as he tries to remold himself as a guard. So for starters, Opeta has an impressive build. He has natural upper body strength and good lean muscle mass. Then, as an athlete, he's able to pull out in space, which is pretty impressive for a guy at his size. That's obviously good translation for becoming a guard rather than a tackle as well. He also has shown athletic ability when moving forward as well. He showed this at the Combine, as he performed really well, running the 5th fastest time of all offensive linemen, had the most bench presses of any lineman, the 4th highest vertical, 8th fastest 3-cone drill, and 7th fastest 20-yard shuttle out of all eligible offensive linemen, including tackles. So, now, some more intangible positives about him are that he was a 3-year starter, so he has plenty of experience and play time, while also being pretty decorated throughout his college career. Finally, I just want to say he's a good mirror on the second level, and that wraps up all his positives. Now, going to his negatives, I'm going to start with where he is slow first. He struggles to change the direction in the desired time you'd want, and while he did have a pretty high 3-cone drill, it should have been even higher to reflect how fast he ran normally. He's also shown to be slow at times right off the snap where he's trying to do his lateral movement. Finally, his eyes are slow to process a twist coming from a defender. But I think his biggest problem, though, is the use of his hands. He lacks command and accuracy, and when he switches to guard, he's going to need a better flat-footed punch as well. Speaking of moving to guard, he's going to need better bend when he moves over as well, otherwise he will not succeed at the NFL level. Now when it comes to how he performs against the defender, he's going to be inconsistent locating his man when his backside is cut off and if a defender gets to him first. Also, when that defender gets to him first, he could knock off balance pretty easily. The final thing I have to say is that his feet come off the ground way too much when he's moving laterally or doing settle steps. It probably contributes to why he can be knocked off balance, if I'm being honest with you. But the bottom line is, before his combine, I probably would have said he would be a 7th-round pick or an undrafted free agent. But after testing so well at the Combine with his athletic ability and pure strength, I think teams are going to want to take a flyer on this tackle turned guard. If he could just get better with his hands or even just his lateral movements, I think he could actually develop into a starting guard with the right team, like the Broncos right now with Mike Munchak. Anyhow, I think Opeta will go in the middle of the 5th round after his Combine performance now. He's still not one of the top guys in my mind. I could see him going in the 4th. I could see him going in the 4th, but more than likely I think he's going mid-5th. I think his athletic ability is going to be very intriguing to a team that develops offensive linemen well. So that was Iosua Opeta from Weber State. So let's hear about Bo Benshaw. I think I said that right, from Wisconsin.
You did say that right. It is Bo Benshaw. Do not let that long name intimidate you. It is not as bad as it may look on the surface. So Benshaw from the University of Georgia, a redshirt senior, or sorry, not Georgia, I'm so sorry, Wisconsin, from the University of Wisconsin. I'm sorry, I got Georgia on my mind because I was reading an article about Aaron Murray earlier. But in any case, Benshaw from Wisconsin, a little bit about him. He was a first-team All-State tight end and defensive end in high school. He redshirted in 2014 at Wisconsin, bulked up and switched positions, and started the final 8 games of the 2015 season, 6 games at right tackle, 2 games at right guard, and parlayed that into a second-team All-Big Ten selection by starting 14 games at right guard in 2016, became a third-team All-American and first-team All-Big Ten in 2017 by starting 14 games at right guard, and then started 13 more last season on his way to becoming a first-team All-American and All-Big Ten. So, unlike Ryan Bates, let's talk a little bit about the good in Benshaw's game. He shows an impressive technique as a run blocker. He's consistently getting his pad level low, and he's 6'6", 309 pounds, so he's 2 inches taller than Ryan Bates, but is still getting consistently lower. That's good to see. Furthermore, he showed good bend and lean at the line of scrimmage when pulling around the offensive line. That's something you always like to see. They're cutting up field quickly when you're lead blocking like that. The coaches at Wisconsin noted Benshaw as a fundamentally sound football player for someone at this level, and his footwork is consistently above the line, and it helps him in picking up players on zone blocking schemes. It also helps out when he's helping out with the double team as well. Benshaw fires out from his stance low, and that'll usually help him get the upper hand early on. He has a powerful upward strike into the defender with good hand placement, and strong hands make shedding Benshaw difficult. His low anchor and powerful lower body make bull rushes difficult to get him off his game. Also a smart offensive lineman, as Wisconsin offensive linemen tend to be. Benshaw was rarely fooled by stunts and twists while at Wisconsin. Coaches noted him for his good vision, and as a former offensive tackle, he's experienced as a pass protector, using a wide base to help him cover more ground. And he's both strong enough and typically athletic enough to handle most pass rushers in college. Granted, the NFL will be different, but it's nice to know that he could handle what was thrown at him in college as well. What's not so good about Benshaw's game, though, he was an inconsistent performer this season. Despite everything good that I just mentioned about him, he still wasn't playing as well as you'd think for all the good that I just talked about. Despite showing that he could keep his pad level consistently low, Benshaw still struggles at times when firing out. I mentioned he fires out quickly, but sometimes he'll lose his angle and will get beaten when a lineman crosses his face. Again, the inconsistency I'm talking about here. And Benshaw has power, but his worst struggles in college came against the stronger and bigger defensive tackles, and his core and upper body strength are still lacking a little bit at this point. Most of his strength comes from his lower body, so he still needs to bulk up in order to become a consistent starter in this league. His initial angles off the line of scrimmage just aren't great right now. I talked about him getting crossed by a defender at the point of attack, and he puts himself at a disadvantage when he engages with his opponents at poor angles. So he'll get driven into the backfield sometimes, or he'll ruin a running play because he's going one way and the offensive line is going another way, due to the fact that his poor angles aren't helping the team. And his poor upper body strength means that he struggles against run blitzes and defenders on the move. Guys... Excuse me. Benshaw will struggle against run blitzes and guys that will excel as finesse rushers in the NFL and hand fights. So bottom line with Benshaw, he's an interesting prospect. A former offensive tackle, Benshaw has good frame and plays with a good technique. However, he lacks the consistent strength at the point of attack and needs to get a little bit stronger in order to become a consistent threat. I'd expect him to be a mid to late round selection. He'd be appealing to teams that like both athletic and smart offensive linemen, but again, the inconsistencies you saw in college are just kind of perplexing. It's like, what's going on here? Like, why is he not playing better, more consistently? So Something interesting to think about. I think he's going to be possibly a late day 2 selection. I think he's got a better chance of being a starter than anybody else that I looked at. I think he's likely a day 2 pick. Could fall into the late, down into day 3, but I think day 2, maybe round 3, or if not, then I think he'll be maybe a round 4 or round 5 guy. Somewhere in those middle rounds, I think, is going to be where Ben Shaw will be picked. Let's hear about your third prospect, Zack Bailey from South Carolina.
Well, Bailey is 6'5" and 299 pounds, and he was a finalist for the South Carolina Mr. Football Award back in 2014 when he came out of high school. The 4-star recruit ended up staying home in South Carolina and joining the Gamecocks. As a freshman, he played in all 12 games where he got to start 5 total, 3 at center, 2 at left guard. In 2016, he became a full-time starter at the left guard position, playing in all 13 games there. In 2017, he moved to right tackle, where he started in 8 of the 9 games played, missing 4 games in the middle of the season with an ankle injury. In the 2018 season, Bailey suffered another injury, this time worse. He broke his left fibula in the team's regular season finale. Still, he had earned second-team All-SEC accolades for his play that year. Bailey declared for the draft following the season, and he's already somewhat healthy, having done the vertical and broad jump at the combine. He did not run the 40-yard dash, though. So what's good about Bailey? When reading about him, the biggest thing I liked about him was his versatility. He had started as a center, guard, and right tackle in college, and he has the size to mirror that in the NFL, meaning he could offer 4 position value for a team that wants to draft him, that being the 2 guard spot, center spot, and right tackle. Now, in terms of how he does in-game, he has decent quickness off the ball and good feet to get to the second level. Also, again, to the second level, he has some ability to adjust to targets in space. Then he's good at widening out to protect his gaps in pass protection and offers balanced posture into his punch. Finally, he has thick-muscled arms, much like an NFL lineman. So what's not so good about him? I think his biggest issue is how he uses his hands and his balance. Starting with his hands first, he doesn't add much pop in his hand as a pass blocker. Then he also lands them a little wide when he throws them. As for his balance, he has a high-cut frame, and he keeps a narrow base when dry blocking. I think those are big contributors as to why he gets knocked off balance so much. Regardless of what caused it, he is too often knocked off balance at the point of attack. Now he has a few problems as a run blocker as well. He lacks power and explosiveness for one, and then he plays with excessive forward lean when run blocking, which also, again, probably contributes to his balance problems. Finally, he can be slow to identify help situations in pass protection. So the bottom line is, Bailey probably would have had higher value if he didn't come off such a bad injury. Maybe even if he didn't miss games the year before. But I think it hurts him a lot going into the draft, even though he has proven to be healthy. Still, though, he has a bunch of positives, and I think a team is going to want to take a flyer on him for his versatility. So I think he's going to go in the late 6th round. I think he's possibly going to go in the 5th round, but it would be late if he does. It's the broken leg is what's really holding him back. I think the broken fibula, that's a major injury. I think if he didn't suffer that, he would be a 5th round pick for sure. But for now, I'm going to say that he's going to be a mid-6th round. So let's hear about Javon Patterson out of Mississippi.
Javon Patterson from Ole Miss, a senior coming out, only 6'3" and 307. This guy is not, a tackle. He did not play tackle, unlike the other 2 guys I looked at in college. So he was exclusively a guard and center. So let me talk a little bit about him. He was one of the top lineman recruits coming out of high school in 2014. He actually enrolled a semester early. He wanted to get a quick start on his freshman season. And because of that, he he played in a few games his freshman year, and then started in 6 of 12 games in 2015, 4 at left guard and 2 at right guard. Then started in all 12 games he played in as a sophomore in 2016, starting 3 at center and then 9 at left guard. And then started all 24 games in his final 2 seasons at left guard. So he was a consistent starter throughout his collegiate career. So a little bit about the good of Patterson. He has shorter legs and a longer torso, which is kind of unusual, but it gives him a natural advantage with pad level and leverage. At least typically that's what you would expect from him. Patterson is an athletic lineman that likes to move quickly on his feet and has flexible hips to help him seal off defenders, similarly to Ben Shaw. He fires out quickly out of his stance and is a powerful blocker that delivers a strong punch when he is pulling. I talked about the good about him pulling. He's a good blocker in space. He can pull long distances. And because of that, we've seen the Steelers do this a lot with their offensive linemen. We've seen their offensive linemen out pulling in front of wide receivers on screens and running backs too, running down the field. So he can do that too. He's pretty good at it. Patterson also showed an ability to flow naturally from the first level to the second level of the defense, both on double teams and in zone blocking plays. Again, he's athletic. It's nice to see that you can move like that. And because of his frame, he has good body control and a good sense for where he should be striking the defender in front of him based on how they're positioned and trying to get past him, of course. Patterson is smart, too. He adjusts well with pre-snap movements along the defensive front, and the great hip flexion he has allows him to seal off defenders from the hole if the play is being run by his side. And Patterson has usually handled speed rushers well in college, but was also surprisingly effective against bull rushers, too. Again, because most of the time he was helping himself with good leverage. But although his frame helps him with leverage, there are some disadvantages with his frame, and one is that he just doesn't have enough strength and girth because of the way his body is right now. He did struggle with slanting defensive linemen in college, and with the way some teams, like especially the Los Angeles Rams, the way they slant their linemen and try to attack and penetrate instead of two-gap, that's something Patterson really struggled with. And although he was a good blocker on the move, Patterson does tend to struggle when he's in base blocking schemes, taking on a guy directly in front of him. He doesn't have a strong punch, again, in base blocking schemes, and he doesn't really impact defenders on down blocks. So that's supposed to be when you're really moving guys on down blocks, but he really needs a double team in order to be moving a guy. He doesn't have enough strength to do it otherwise. And although he does recognize pre-snap movement along the front, like I mentioned, he's still a step slow in picking up twists, blitzes, and stunts along the defensive line, which is a big deal for a quarterback. And he tends to lose his edge too much in pass pro. And this is something that's interesting because I remember being taught this when I played offensive line. If nobody is rushing you, like you're just sitting there as an offensive lineman in pass protection, you gotta go find somebody to block. He stands around far too often and really just sits there, and he could be helping somebody out. So he needs to be working more on helping out his teammates when he's got nothing to do. So all in all, Javon Patterson, another athletic offensive lineman I looked at, and he's an interesting fit for most offenses. He's one of those weird players where he was a consistent starter, and the opposite of the high potential guys who don't necessarily project well. Patterson is a guy that started a lot in college, but doesn't have a ton of upside. He doesn't really excel in many areas, but he also doesn't really struggle a lot in many areas either. He's still just a solid offensive lineman. His lack of length, I'd have to imagine, is going to get him moved to center, but he does still need to get stronger to stick in this league. But if he does, he could possibly be a starting center. I think he's more likely a backup for a team that needs an offensive lineman that moves well. But I still think it's possible that he could be selected. I think he's a 6th or 7th round guy, possibly an undrafted free agent. I don't know necessarily if he's a priority one, but I think it's definitely possible. So now that we've talked about all three of our prospects respectively, Austin, let's do what we've been doing. Rank your prospects in terms of how well you think they'd fit with the Steelers and who you'd want on the Steelers the most.
For me, I'm going to start off with Sean Rawlings, and it's basically all comes down to draft position. I feel like since Rawlings is the only one I felt like would be undrafted out of the three I looked at, I think he makes the most sense for the Steelers this year. So I picked him for basically just that. And following him, I was Zack Bailey, because Zack Bailey's versatility to be able to play 4 positions in the NFL, both guard spots, the center position, and then right tackle. That's a lot that the Steelers could work with. I like that, and he is also a lower. He's expected to be drafted lower than Iosua, and that leaves Iosua for last. Opeta is had a stellar combine, and before the combine, he probably would have been undrafted free agent, but he's going to need the highest pick now, in my opinion. I think that for the Steelers, it just doesn't make sense to take this guy when they have like a complete roster for the interior offensive lineman. So that's why I have it as Sean Rawlings first, Zach Bailey second, and I also Opeta as third. So how do you rank the prospects you looked at?
I had Bo Benshaw first, the University of Wisconsin product. Now, he's not likely to be available if the Steelers end up taking a guard because he's likely a early day 3 pick or even a late day 2 pick. But I think he fits what the Steelers are looking for in offensive lineman pretty well. He's athletic and he's smart and he just fits the mold of what the Steelers typically like. So I think he'd fit the best, but I still think it's highly unlikely he goes to Pittsburgh. Javon Patterson was second for me. He's kind of a discount Bo Benshaw. He can play all 3 interior offensive line positions. He can move well and he's experienced. But he's not strong enough right now and doesn't really project as well as the other linemen I looked at. He could still be a decent backup in the right system, but obviously he wouldn't be doing anything probably more than being a practice squad player, at least in year 1. Last I had Ryan Bates, and it's just because he doesn't fit well in many schemes right now. He basically could only play right now in a zone blocking scheme. And when you're limiting yourself in the types of offenses you can play, that's kind of concerning, even for an offensive lineman too. But I still think that there's a chance he could project well to the NFL level as a decent player, and we already know that his versatility was important, and that could help him stick around other places too, because we didn't really think much of Chris Hubbard for a few years, and he turned out to be a pretty darn good offensive lineman himself due to the help of Mike Munchak and Sean Surratt. But all that aside, time will tell, but I just think Bates doesn't fit well in Pittsburgh right now. So interior offensive line from right to left, give me your starting offensive line, and then if you have backups, B.J. Finney and anyone else, who do you think they're going to be?
From right to left, it's David DeCastro, Marquise Hemsley, Ramon Foster. No surprise there. Backups is going to be B.J. Finney, and just because to make it different, I'm going to say Zach Banner's going to turn to a guard and be the second backup. There's got to be a reason Zach Banner was kept on the roster, so I'm going to say that they think he could play multiple positions. So I'm going to say he turns guard. How do you have it?
I have the same starting trio that we've had for the last 6 to 7 years. Nothing too surprising there. I have, obviously, as the top backup, I have B.J. Finney. And then secondary, I have Matt Filer because Filer has played guard previously in the NFL. He was actually listed as a guard with the Steelers in 2017, too. So that's more of a natural position for him, actually, too. But he can play tackle, as we saw as well. So I'll have Finney as my main interior backup, followed by Matt Filer. Let's transition to NFL topics now. Obviously, a lot has happened since our last podcast as free agency has continued on. A lot of bigger signings have kind of wrapped up, but there's still a lot to talk about. So let's try to fire these off quickly here. Let's start with Tyler Eifert. The often injured tight end has re-signed with the Bengals. Eifert has only caught 48 passes for 619 yards, not this year, but in the last 3 years combined since his 2015 Pro Bowl season that saw him catch 13 touchdowns. I've always been a big fan of Eifert, Austin, but I don't know, man. He just can't stay healthy.
Yeah, it's going to be rough, but that's why it's only a one-year deal. It's a prove-it deal. Last year's injury was especially gruesome, so we'll see. This year's going to be telling to see if his NFL career continues as it is, because if he doesn't have a good season or he gets injured, I have to think that his NFL career is over.
3-time Pro Bowl center Max Unger of the New Orleans Saints has announced his retirement after 10 years relatively suddenly. He won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks in 2013, but had spent the last 4 years with the New Orleans Saints. I reached out to my friend Jesse on Twitter to talk a little bit to see kind of what he thought about the loss of Unger, kind of how impactful it would be. It's a big loss, but it seems like they have an idea in place as far as how they're going to replace him.
Yeah, it seems like they signed Easton, the former Vikings, to do it. There was a big issue with that. It seemed like a big issue at the time anyway. The NFL denied his contract at first, but there was just some writing that something went wrong with that, and they immediately fixed it. But so I think Easton is the replacement for now, but it does stink for the team that was so good and their offensive line was one of the best in the league, if not the best, to lose the guy in the middle. But I think they're still going to be fine. I don't think it hurts them as much as it could. Hopefully, Easton isn't too much of a downgrade, though.
The Raiders have released three-time Pro Bowl tackle Donald Penn. The 35-year-old played a big part of the Raiders' return to the playoffs in 2015. He played in just 4 games this past season, though. There are rumors that he could be signing with the Houston Texans soon.
I think the Texans are a good fit for him. He's very old, and I mean, it made sense for the Raiders, too. He cost a lot of money, and he only played 4 games last season, and he's up there in age. He's 35. Players don't really make it much further than this for the most part. So I think for the Raiders it made sense, and I think for the Houston Texans, whose line is absolutely god-awful, it also makes sense for the right price.
Ryan Tannehill, his era in Miami is over. The Dolphins look like they're tanking for a quarterback next year. They get a 7th-round pick in 2019 and a conditional 4th-round pick in 2020. Ryan Tannehill, traded to the Tennessee Titans, is expected to be the backup to Marcus Mariota after the trade, while the previous backup, Blaine Gabbert, has been released. You like the move for both teams?
I actually thought that the Titans gave up too much for Tannehill. I really didn't think he was going to net that much for Miami. So I think Miami won the deal. A lot of people said it was a fair deal. I'm not sure about that. I think Tannehill's a decent backup, but I don't know. Giving a 4th and a 7th for Tannehill and a 6th, I wasn't about it. I didn't think personally that. I think that the Dolphins won that trade. What do you think?
I think it is fair for both teams because you look at Marcus Mariota's track record. Don't be shocked if Ryan Tannehill is starting 6 to 8 games this year. Brock Osweiler had to start more games than he should have last year, and even though he looked good in a couple, Tannehill is the perfect kind of backup for Marcus Mariota. They're both similar type of quarterbacks, and I don't remember exactly, but I was pretty sure that under who was the Dolphins coach? Why am I blanking on him? He's not there anymore.
Philbin?
No. I don't know. I'm blanking. But anyways, I thought Tannehill had a... maybe it was Philbin. Tannehill had a winning record with Philbin. I thought so. I don't know. I'll need to double check on that. But I don't hate the trade for either side at all. I can clearly see where the Dolphins are going with this one, too. The Jacksonville Jaguars signed former Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Chris Conley. Conley caught 32 passes for 334 yards and a career-high 5 touchdowns in 2019, a new target for Nick Foles.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like a budget Dante Moncrief, so I think it makes sense for the Jaguars.
The Browns running back Kareem Hunt, has been suspended 8 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. He does not plan to appeal. I think it's going to be very dangerous when he returns.
Yeah. I'm still not a fan of them signing it. I mean, you can never have too much talent, but I like Nick Chubb as the primetime starter and Duke Johnson coming in. It looks like they're probably going to trade Duke Johnson.
The Indianapolis Colts today just signed a former outside linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs, Justin Houston. Due to the system the Colts play, Houston will play as a defensive end. Houston, there had been reports linking him to Pittsburgh, but I think we all knew that he was never coming. He was just too expensive. And he's going to be playing in Indianapolis. So what do you think about that move?
It's a 2-year, $24 million deal. It's probably a little bit too much for the oft-injured older pass rusher, but I feel like the Colts didn't make a single move this offseason. It was kind of ridiculous. I mean, they signed Devin Funchess for probably too much money, but like the Colts had the most cap space coming into this season. Like they should have been shelling out money. So it makes sense why Justin Houston got as much as they did, but I think the Colts just messed up this offseason really badly. I'm not sure what they were doing.
The Colts had money to spend, and in this instance, they were willing to overpay. I guess in this instance, it's fine, but it's clear that they have something going with head coach Frank Reich, and they don't seem to be that interested in spending a ton of money. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Backup quarterback Robert Griffin III of the Baltimore Ravens has been re-signed, and he's expected to be the primary backup to Lamar Jackson at this time. I think that's a good move. They're both pretty similar quarterbacks, and Griffin getting another chance to continue his NFL career.
Yeah, if you're committing to Lamar Jackson, Robert Griffin is the perfect backup because if Lamar Jackson gets hurt, you have an almost the exact same player almost the exact same player that Lamar Jackson is. So I think it's a good move for them since they're committing to Lamar Jackson as their starter.
The Saints are expected to sign free agent tight end Jared Cook, who most recently played with the Oakland Raiders. He had a really good season in Oakland. That's a big-time signing for the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I think that actually the move of Max Unger retiring gets canceled out by this move because this is such a big-time move. It's still in the offense, obviously two different positions, but I think they cancel it out so that the Saints don't get worse, but they don't get better either.
Free agent quarterback Blake Bortles and outside linebacker Clay Matthews have both signed with the Los Angeles Rams, ending memorable tenures in Jacksonville and Green Bay, respectively.
Yeah, I was surprised with Clay Matthews moving on from Green Bay. I always thought he'd end his career there, but, I mean, he said he wanted to be in L.A. He wanted to be close, so it works out for him. And the Blake Bortles signing, it was cheap, so it was good.
The AAF has moved its championship game from Las Vegas to Frisco, Texas, where the Dallas Cowboys practice facility is. They were going to play the game in Las Vegas, like I mentioned. I think it was a 34,000-seat stadium, and now they're moving it to the 12,000-seat facility in Frisco. What do you think about this move?
I don't know. I liked it in Las Vegas, so I'm not a big fan. I guess they just don't expect a big crowd, and they want it to look full, I guess. So that's what I think about it. How about you?
I think there's that, and I think there's also the continuing kind of direction the AAF is heading in to try to become the official minor league of the NFL. I think the way they've kind of negotiated with Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, who obviously owns the facility in Frisco, I think that's a good way of trying to get a guy who's powerful in the NFL on your side. And based on what I was reading about Jerry Jones and kind of his interactions with the higher-ups in the AAF, I think it's a good sign going forward for the league as they continue to garner support from guys like Jerry Jones in the NFL. So I think this is a good move for the league. And let me just tell you, if San Antonio makes it to the finals for the AAF, it's going to be a home game for them. They're making that 4-hour drive.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree. And so we'll see if the Commanders make it there, though. Fleet's gonna come back. Don't you worry.
There is still 3 weeks left in the regular season. And then let's kind of talk about the last thing I had mentioned it before. Vontaze Burfict released by the Cincinnati Bengals. The end of an era, and probably his most memorable moment was absolutely destroying Antonio Brown on an incredibly dirty hit in the 2016 AFC wildcard game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And now, him and Brown are teammates as he is signed with the Oakland Raiders. And Brown, I don't know if he's necessarily happy about it, but he's putting on a brave face right now and is willing to let bygones be bygones. Meanwhile, he's throwing his former Hall of Fame quarterback under the bus who helped make him a superstar. But what do you make of all this? The releasing of Burfict by the Bengals, which I'm sure wasn't all that surprising given they finally have a new regime coming in, but still the end of an era, and now Brown and Burfict teammates together in Oakland.
It's definitely going to be interesting. I really, really, really hope that the Oakland Raiders get Hard Knocks. I think that they're the most interesting team. I think that it's going to be they are one of the teams that if they're chosen, they can't say no. So I really hope the Raiders are the Hard Knocks team because I might actually watch it this year. I don't stereotypically watch it, but there's just so much interesting things to be watching out for this year with the Oakland Raiders. And this move is one of the Antonio Brown has already came out on Twitter and just said some random, I don't know. I never understand Antonio Brown's tweets, but he's like, don't put people against each other. And it's just like, well, we didn't put you guys against each other. We saw Burfict almost kill you in the playoffs a few years ago. So apparently he's willing to at least let it go for now or on the surface. But just Antonio Brown doesn't really make sense. But, I mean, I understand. You can't just be like, well, I hate my new teammate. He's got to keep it cool on the surface, which he actually hasn't been good at doing. So I guess he's growing as a person. I don't know.
No, he just got his money, so he's willing to be a good soldier for now.
Yeah. I have one more thing to to talk about for NFL news. Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is under investigation, and there's been some pretty nasty things coming out. We don't know if it's true yet, but Tyreek Hill is, if Tyreek Hill is found guilty, he's likely being banned indefinitely from the league, and it's going to be hard for a team to want to bring him in. There's reports that he broke into his baby's house, his baby mama's house, and broke his 3-year-old's arm. I haven't seen follow-ups on this yet. This was just an accusation, but if he is found guilty, he is getting cut. There's no way, because if he's found guilty, there's just no better way of saying it. He's just a piece of garbage. That's what it is. Tyreek Hill already had those issues coming out of college. He had a domestic abuse accusation, I believe, unless I'm confusing with someone else. I think that's what hurt his draft stock. So it's not looking good right now, but there'll be updates on that later. But I wanted to talk about that just to watch out for it, because obviously it's a big deal to lose two of their top players to like domestic abuse and stuff like that. The Kansas City Chiefs, I mean. Well,
yes, and the issue you were referring to previously is that did happen. That was Tyreek Hill. It was he was arrested on complaints of assault that his 20-year-old pregnant girlfriend, that the two of them got into an argument. He threw her around, quote unquote, like a rag doll, punched her in the face, and punched her in the stomach, and she was pregnant with the child that was born, and now 3 years later, Tyreek Hill allegedly broke this child's arm. So so not only did he do that, but he also punched her in the stomach 5 years ago. So he seems like a really great dude if all this stuff is true. So
stand up guy.
100% for sure. So again, like Austin said, be sure to keep in mind that that's going to be something that we'll be looking out for. Sure to be getting updates throughout the long NFL offseason that continues as we push our way through the end of March here. One last thing to talk about, Austin. The past couple months with Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell leaving Pittsburgh and signing and / being traded to other teams, we've heard a lot of talk about Ben Roethlisberger, about who's really the problem for the Steelers underachieving these past few years, and a lot of blame is being hurled at Ben Roethlisberger's feet, and he's been called out by a bunch of different people, and the biggest accusation or biggest piece of news to come from it was a former Steelers running back named Josh Harris, who had, I believe, 5 career carries in the NFL, accused Roethlisberger of intentionally fumbling a ball during the 2014 regular season finale against the Cincinnati Bengals. The situation, the Steelers were up 27-17 with less than 2 minutes to go, and all they had to do was kneel down on the ball to end the game. Reportedly, this is what Harris said happened. The play came in, and Roethlisberger decided, instead of running the play, to fumble to spite Todd Haley because he didn't like the play call, and that's what he thinks that Roethlisberger did. Now, I don't know kind of what you think about this, Austin, but we kind of talked about this before. I don't know. I just don't see that happening. The best way for Roethlisberger to be petty at Todd Haley for making that kind of call is to just kneel on the ball in that situation. There's no need to open yourself up to do something like that and potentially have the ball returned for a touchdown and make it a 3-point game. That just seems insanely ridiculous to even suggest. And then the fact that it's gaining such traction in the national media. And by the way, the national media has just been bagging on Roethlisberger the last few weeks. And while, granted, I will admit that I don't think he's the nicest person or the best leader that I've ever seen, I think that it's being overplayed a lot.
I think people don't even have all the facts. Some of the claims are baseless. Ben doesn't take responsibility when he's wrong. That's completely false narrative that several media people have just adopted, and it's now canon because a bunch of media people said it. And even though there's plenty of sound bites where Ben's I need to play better and do this, or I did this wrong. The biggest argument that the people have is that in the Denver game in this past season, he put no blame on himself, which he should have. He should have put blame on himself, but just because he didn't that one time, Ben has taken responsibility so many other times, when even sometimes it wasn't his fault. So I find that to be the most annoying one. As for the Josh Harris claims, like, that one was denied by so many other people after that. Marquise Pouncey, Marcus Gilbert, Isaac Redmond, Bruce Gudkowski, like a bunch of these former Steelers and current ones that were also on the field that day that deny it. So it's like, it's hard to know. I don't think he fumbled on purpose. I don't think that fumble was out of spite. I think it purely was an accident. And mostly because I would have believed it more if Josh Harris wasn't the guy that blamed his college coaches coming out for ruining his draft stock. It makes his claims a little bit more baseless, especially when he has like 5 people against him that were on the team at the time, on and off the field. So I don't know. I think that's also false. And like you said, Bennett hasn't been like the nicest person or the best leader, but the media definitely makes it so much worse. And Le'Veon Bell changing his argument as why he left the Steelers or why he took less money just to make Ben look bad is terrible. That's exactly what he's doing. He's trying to make it so, oh yeah, I didn't miss out on money with the Steelers. I didn't want to be there. It changed from I wasn't getting the guaranteed money to Ben was the problem. That's been the narrative change. So Le'Veon Bell gets being called an idiot for not taking the money he could have had with Pittsburgh. So that's my thoughts on the situation.
I think you covered it pretty well, and it's just honestly, it's really annoying. But one thing I will say is I think that it's kind of interesting to see. We haven't heard Roethlisberger say anything, and I mean, come on, he has to know this is happening.
Oh, he definitely does, but I think the best way is just stay quiet and play through the season, have the best season of your career, and prove everyone wrong.
I don't know that he's going to have his best season ever, but I think he's going to have maybe his best offseason ever, and I think he's going to have a really, really good year. And I think, again, it's funny. This is something when the Browns got Odell Beckham Jr. and everyone was talking about them winning the division, there was one guy I saw who said, don't mail in the Steelers just yet. It was actually Colin Cowherd who said that he still thinks the Steelers are going to win the division. And I thought that was kind of interesting because people are picking the Steelers to finish third in their division, and he was talking about how the Steelers are finally something that they haven't been for years, and that's doubted. And I think that is going to play right into Roethlisberger's hands and the Steelers' hands, and I think over time they're going to prove people wrong. But again, there's still a long time to go until that, but I think he's going to have a really great year, and I think the Steelers are going to be just fine.
Funny enough, thinking about bad analysts, Skip Bayless also said he thinks Ben Roethlisberger is going to have an MVP season. I hate Colin Cowherd, and I also don't like Skip Bayless. So, I don't know how much I value what they say, but apparently they have high hopes for the Steelers, and specifically Ben Roethlisberger this season.
I agree with you. I don't like Skip Bayless either, and I don't know. I find it hard to trust national media guys a lot because they aren't there every day. But at the same time, it's still interesting to think that those points are what's provided, is that you've got all this going against you, and yet Roethlisberger, I think, is going to have a very good season. What do you guys think? Do you think Ben Roethlisberger is primed to have one of his better seasons after everything that's gone on now with his back against the wall? Because we all know what the narrative is going to be if the Steelers struggle this year, is that he was the issue. So I think that'll be interesting, but maybe that's something we can talk more about going forward. But for now, we talked a little bit about the Steelers' signings, re-signings, and some of the free agents they lost, and then we talked about some interior offensive line prospects. Next time we talk to you, we'll be talking about offensive tackle prospects. We're working our way through here, Austin. The draft is just a little over a month away, and pretty soon we'll be knowing who the newest Steelers draft picks are.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Hopefully it's not an offensive lineman in the first 3 rounds.
Yes, indeed, because I don't think we'll be looking at any of those types of players.
No.
All right. Well, as always, thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to email the show. We'll answer it on air at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com, and check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a terrific night. Have a good night, Austin.
Have a good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.